Victoria Monroe never expected that leaving a charity gala 2 hours early would be the moment everything she thought she knew about her own life would crumble to dust. As her black Mercedes pulled through the iron gates of her Beverly Hills estate, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, an unfamiliar sound drifted through the evening air. Laughter. Real laughter. Pure and unrestrained, echoing from the garden behind the West Wing. It was her son's voice, Ethan's voice, a sound she hadn't heard in so long she'd almost forgotten what joy sounded like coming from him. For 2 years, ever since the accident that killed her husband Daniel and left 7-year-old Ethan with severe nerve damage in both legs, the boy had stopped laughing. Doctors said the trauma, both physical and emotional, had locked something inside him, turning a once vibrant child into a quiet shadow who barely spoke above a whisper. The specialist told her he'd need leg braces and crutches permanently. They said nerve regeneration at his level of injury was highly unlikely, bordering on impossible. And instead of fighting that prognosis, instead of staying by her son's side through the endless physical therapy sessions and tearful nights, Victoria had done what she always did when pain threatened to overwhelm her. She ran. She buried herself in work, board meetings, property acquisitions, multi-million-dollar developments, as if building empires could somehow fill the void left by a family that was falling apart. That guilt followed her everywhere, a constant weight pressing on her chest, transforming Victoria Monroe from a loving mother into the cold, untouchable real estate mogul Forbes wrote about with equal parts admiration and fear. But now, standing frozen at the garden gate, Victoria's heart stopped. There, on the perfectly manicured lawn bathed in golden twilight, was Marcus Chen, the night janitor she'd hired 8 months ago through a staffing agency, a man so quiet and unassuming she barely remembered his face. He was kneeling on one knee in his navy blue work uniform, yellow rubber gloves still on his hands, and beside him stood Ethan, not sitting in his wheelchair, not leaning on his crutches, but standing upright, trembling but vertical, his small hands gripping Marcus's shoulders for balance. What made Victoria's blood turn to ice wasn't just the sight itself. It was what Marcus was doing. The janitor was guiding Ethan through a series of precise physical therapy movements with the skill and confidence of a trained medical professional. His rough, calloused hands she'd seen scrubbing floors and emptying trash bins, moved with astonishing precision, supporting Ethan's weak legs at exact pressure points, adjusting angles with the kind of expertise that takes years to develop. Marcus spoke softly, his voice a steady rhythm. Remember, buddy, engage your core. Feel the strength in your left quad. Now shift your weight, slowly, just like we practiced. That's it. You're doing incredible. Medical terminology, muscle groups, biomechanics, words and techniques Victoria had heard only from the $500 per hour specialist she'd hired from Cedars-Sinai. Ethan's face was flushed with effort, but his green eyes that had been dull and lifeless for months, were shining. He giggled as he shifted his weight from his left leg to his right, wobbling but holding steady. Marcus, I did it. I held it for 10 seconds. 11 seconds, actually, Marcus said with a warm smile, his voice full of pride. You just beat your personal record. You're getting stronger every single day, Ethan. Victoria stood paralyzed behind the hedge, her designer heels sinking into the soft grass, her mind a hurricane of emotions she couldn't name. Anger. How dare an employee interfere with her son's medical care without permission? Confusion. How could a janitor know techniques her elite medical team had never tried? Heartbreak. The person who could make her son smile, who could give him hope, who could make him believe in himself again, wasn't her. And beneath it all, buried so deep she didn't want to admit it existed, was jealousy. Raw, bitter jealousy that this stranger had reached her son in ways she never could. But there was something else gnawing at her, a question that sent chills racing down her spine. How could an ordinary janitor understand the human body with such expertise? That mystery clung to her mind, refusing to let go. And if you're curious about who this seemingly simple man really is, and how one-night Janitor would turn a billionaire's entire world upside down. Don't forget to subscribe and follow the next chapter, because what Victoria discovers about Marcus Chen will make you question everything you thought you knew about success, sacrifice, and second chances. Marcus Chen, 35 years old, came from a working-class neighborhood in Koreatown, Los Angeles. His dark hair was always slightly disheveled. His brown eyes carried the weight of too many sleepless nights, and his hands, rough and callous from years of manual labor, told a story of sacrifice most people would never understand. He had the kind of face that blended into crowds, the kind of presence people overlooked. When Victoria had interviewed him 8 months ago through a staffing agency, the first thing she'd noticed wasn't his resume, which was almost completely blank with a conspicuous 3-year gap in employment, but his eyes. Honest, steady, humble. He'd sat across from her in her pristine office, dressed in clothes that had been washed too many times, and said simply, "Mrs. Monroe, I need this job to support my daughter. I'll work harder than anyone you've ever hired. You have my word." Victoria hadn't hired him because of credentials or references. She'd hired him because something in his quiet desperation reminded her of herself. Someone fighting to survive, to protect what little they had left. Over the past 8 months, Marcus had proven that instinct right. He arrived an hour early every morning, never once complained, never asked for overtime pay. His work was meticulous, every floor spotless, every surface gleaming. He moved through the house like a ghost, respectful and invisible. But what Victoria didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that each night after his shift ended, Marcus took 2 buses back to a cramped studio apartment in Koreatown, where he lived with his 8-year-old daughter, Maya. Maya had her father's dark hair and quiet demeanor, but her eyes carried a sadness no child should know. She'd been diagnosed with severe autism at age 2, shortly before her mother. Marcus's wife, Lynn, died from complications during childbirth with her second child, a baby boy who didn't survive. That double tragedy had shattered Marcus's world, leaving him alone with a grieving, nonverbal daughter and medical debt that would take decades to repay. Maya barely spoke. She communicated through drawings, through the way she rocked back and forth when overwhelmed, through the tight grip of her small hand when she needed reassurance. Marcus had become both mother and father to her. He learned everything he could about autism, read books, watched online videos, joined support groups, studied therapies he couldn't afford. Every morning, he woke at 5 a.m. to make her breakfast, brushed her hair into 2 neat braids, and walked her to the free special needs program 3 blocks away. Then he'd catch the bus to Beverly Hills, work a full shift, and return home to spend his evenings helping Maya with sensory exercises, homework, and the slow, patient work of helping her navigate a world that didn't understand her. What Sabrina Lennox never imagined was that the quiet man scrubbing her floors carried a past he'd tried to bury, a past that might explain why he knew complex physical therapy techniques so well and why he'd risk everything to help a child who reminded him of the son he'd lost. Victoria Monroe, 38 years old, was the CEO and founder of Monroe Properties, a real estate empire worth over $2 billion. She had sharp gray eyes that could cut through boardroom negotiations like a knife, sleek blonde hair always pulled into a perfect bun, and the kind of tailored power suits that commanded respect the moment she entered a room. Born to a middle-class family in Pasadena, Victoria had clawed her way to the top through sheer determination, sacrificing sleep, relationships, and any semblance of work-life balance to build something that would prove she was more than her humble origins. But success had come with a price. Her marriage to Daniel Monroe, a kind, gentle architect who believed in her when no one else did, had crumbled under the weight of her ambition. And then, 2 years ago, on a rainy November night, Daniel had been driving Ethan home from soccer practice when a drunk driver ran a red light and slammed into their car at full speed. Daniel died on impact. Ethan survived, but the trauma left him with severe nerve damage in both legs. Damage the doctors said was irreversible. Victoria had fallen apart. For weeks, she couldn't get out of bed. She couldn't look at Ethan without seeing Daniel's face, without being consumed by guilt that she hadn't been the one driving, that she'd been at yet another late-night meeting instead of picking up her son herself. So she did what she'd always done when emotions threatened to drown her. She buried herself in work. She spent 16-hour days at the office, acquiring properties, closing deals, building an empire that meant nothing compared to the family she was losing. Ethan, once a bright, energetic boy who loved soccer and drawing and telling terrible jokes, had withdrawn into himself. He stopped speaking much. He stopped smiling. He sat in his wheelchair day after day, staring out the window, waiting for a mother who was never home and a father who would never come back. Victoria knew she was failing him. She knew the guilt was eating her alive, but she didn't know how to stop running, until the night she came home early and saw Chen kneeling in the garden, teaching her son to believe in miracles again. Ethan Monroe, 7 years old, had his father's blonde hair and his mother's sharp green eyes that used to sparkle with mischief, but now carried the weight of loss no child should bear. Before the accident, Ethan had been the kind of kid who never stopped moving, always running, climbing, laughing. He'd loved soccer, dreamed of being a professional player someday, spent hours kicking a ball around the backyard with his dad. But that life felt like a distant memory now. After the accident, after the surgeries and the months of failed physical therapy and the doctor's grim prognosis, Ethan had stopped believing in anything. He relied on a wheelchair to get around, wore heavy leg braces that chafed his skin, and needed crutches for the few steps he could manage. The pain was constant. The loneliness was worse. His father was gone. His mother was never home. And his classmates, who used to invite him to birthday parties and playdates, had slowly stopped calling. Being this special kid in the wheelchair made him invisible. Until Marcus. Marcus was different. Marcus didn't look at him with pity. Marcus didn't treat him like he was broken. Marcus talked to him like he was strong, like he was capable, like he was a warrior. And slowly, week by week, Ethan started to believe it. Started to hope that maybe, just maybe, he could walk again. That maybe his life wasn't over. He just didn't know if his mother would ever believe it too. The next morning, Victoria couldn't focus on a single thing. She sat in her corner office on the 15th floor of her downtown Los Angeles headquarters, staring blankly at spreadsheets and acquisition reports that usually consumed her attention. But all she could see was the image of Marcus and Ethan in the garden, her son standing, laughing, looking more alive than he had in 2 years. By noon, Victoria made a decision. She needed answers. She needed to know who Chen really was. When she arrived home that afternoon, earlier than usual, a fact that didn't escape the notice of her assistant, Victoria found Marcus in the kitchen, preparing a snack for Ethan. He looked up when she entered, his expression calm but wary. "Marcus," Victoria said, her voice cold and controlled. "I need to talk to you. About yesterday. About what I saw in the garden." Marcus froze, a knife still in his hand as he sliced an apple. His shoulders tensed, but his voice remained steady. "Mrs. Monroe, I can explain." "Explain." Victoria's tone sharpened. "You were performing physical therapy on my son without my permission. You're not trained for that. You're a janitor." Marcus set down the knife slowly, his hands trembling slightly. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't mean to overstep. Where did you learn those techniques?" Victoria pressed, stepping closer. "How does a janitor know medical terminology that my specialists don't even use?" Marcus stayed silent for a long moment, his fingers gripping the edge of the counter. Finally, he looked up, and Victoria saw something in his eyes she hadn't expected. Pain. Deep, soul-crushing pain. "My daughter, Maya," he said quietly. "She was born with severe autism and developmental motor delays. My wife, Lynn, she was a physical therapist before she died. She taught me everything she knew so I could take care of Maya myself. We couldn't afford professional therapy, so I had to learn. I became my daughter's therapist." Victoria felt something shift in her chest. "Maya's 8 now." Marcus continued, his voice soft but fierce. "She still struggles, but she's learned to communicate, to regulate her emotions, to believe in herself. Doctors once said she'd never function in a regular classroom. Today, she's in 2nd grade, helping other kids." The words hit Victoria like a wave. This man, this humble, overlooked janitor, had achieved something she, with all her wealth and resources, had failed to do. He'd healed a child through love. "You had no right," Victoria said, though her voice had lost its edge. "No right to make decisions about my son's treatment without my consent." "You're right," Marcus said, nodding. "But Mrs. Monroe," Ethan was giving up. He lost all hope. "I just wanted to help." At that moment, a small voice came from the doorway. "Mom? You're home early." Victoria turned. Ethan was sitting in his wheelchair, but something was different. He was sitting straighter. His shoulders weren't slumped. His eyes were bright. "Ethan," Victoria said, her voice catching. "Go to your room. The adults are talking." The words came out automatically, cold, dismissive, and Victoria hated herself the moment she said them. Ethan's smile flickered and vanished. But Marcus knelt down to meet Ethan's gaze. "Hey, buddy," he said gently. "Why don't you wait for me in the living room? I'll come teach you that new balance exercise in a few minutes, okay?" Ethan nodded, his smile returning, and wheeled himself away. The kitchen fell silent again. Marcus looked at Victoria, his expression calm but unwavering. "Mrs. Monroe, I know you see me as just a janitor. Maybe that's all I am. But your son is improving, and you know it." Victoria wanted to argue, wanted to deny it, but she couldn't. "My methods may not be as scientific as the experts," Marcus said, his voice deep and warm. "But they're built on love, and sometimes that's the only thing that makes the difference." Victoria stood there, her emotions a tangled mess of pride, shame, anger, and something she hadn't felt in years: hope. She didn't know what to say, didn't know what to do. But one thing was certain. Marcus Chen had just become the most dangerous person in her life, because he'd shown her a truth she'd been running from for 2 years. She'd abandoned her son when he needed her most. And now, this quiet, humble janitor was forcing her to face it. In the days that followed, Victoria began watching Marcus differently. She installed extra security cameras throughout the house, officially for safety reasons, but really to observe every move Marcus made. And what she discovered left her speechless. Marcus arrived an hour early every morning, never asking for overtime. He stayed late to help Ethan with exercises. On weekends, he came back voluntarily, unpaid, just to continue their sessions. Victoria watched the footage and saw him transform Ethan's room into a makeshift therapy space. Pillows arranged as balance obstacles, resistance bands made from old clothing, dumbbells improvised from sand-filled water bottles. One afternoon, Victoria found a thick notebook hidden in Marcus's bag. Inside, in careful handwriting, were detailed notes documenting every session with Ethan. Day 12. Ethan held balance for 8 seconds. Confidence improving. Day 18. Lifted left leg independently. Breakthrough moment. Day 24. Smiled during exercises. First genuine smile in weeks. Victoria sat on the floor of her son's room, clutching the notebook, tears streaming down her face. This man, this janitor, had poured more love, more time, more hope into her son than she had in 2 years. And Victoria realized with crushing clarity, she needed to know who Marcus Chen really was. She needed to understand what drove him, what he was hiding, because something told her that the answers would change everything. That night, Victoria made a decision that would alter the course of all their lives. She picked up the phone and called a private investigator she'd used for corporate espionage cases, a man who specialized in digging up secrets people wanted to keep buried. "I need you to follow someone," she said, her voice cold and businesslike. "I need to know everything. Where he goes, who he sees, what he's hiding." "Name?" the investigator asked. "Marcus Chen." And with that single call, Victoria set in motion a chain of events that would uncover truths she never expected. Truths about sacrifice, survival, and the extraordinary power of second chances. By dawn the next morning, Victoria sat in her home office, surrounded by shadows. The city below, still sleeping as pale light, crept through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Spread across her mahogany desk was Marcus Chen's employment file. A document so bare it looked like someone had deliberately erased their own existence. No professional references, no letters of recommendation, just a Koreatown address, a single phone number, and a 3-year gap in employment history that screamed of something hidden. Victoria traced her finger over the sparse information, her mind racing. Who was this man? What had he been doing during those missing years? And why would someone with his obvious skill be content scrubbing floors in someone else's mansion? She picked up her phone and dialed the investigator again. How long will this take? Depends what we're looking for, came the gruff reply. Standard background check? 2 days. Deep dive into someone's entire life? Could take a week. I want the deep dive, Victoria said. Every detail. I don't care what it costs. Meanwhile, across the city in a cramped studio apartment in Koreatown, Marcus Chen's day was already beginning. The alarm buzzed at 5 a.m. sharp. Marcus reached over and silenced it before it could wake Maya, though he knew from experience that his daughter rarely slept soundly through the night. He sat up slowly, his back aching from years of manual labor, and glanced at the corner of the room where Maya slept on a narrow mattress. She was already awake, had probably been awake for hours, rocking gently back and forth, her arms wrapped around her knees. She didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge his presence, just rocked in that steady, rhythmic motion that meant she was trying to self-soothe, try to manage the overwhelming sensory input of simply existing in the world. "Good morning, sweetheart," Marcus said softly, keeping his voice low and calm the way he'd learned she needed. No sudden movements, no loud noises, just steady, predictable routine. Maya didn't respond, but her rocking slowed slightly, her way of acknowledging him. Marcus moved to the tiny kitchenette and began preparing breakfast. Toast, cut into perfect squares the way Maya liked. Scrambled eggs, cooked dry because she couldn't tolerate the texture of anything runny. Orange juice in the blue cup, always the blue cup, never any other color, or she wouldn't drink it. He set the plate in front of her on the floor. She wouldn't sit at the small table, found it too confining, and watched as she slowly reached for a piece of toast, examining it carefully before taking a small bite. "That's good, Maya. You're doing great." After breakfast, Marcus helped her get dressed, braided her dark hair into 2 neat plaits, and walked her 3 blocks to the special needs school, one of the only free programs available in their neighborhood. The teachers there understood children like Maya, knew how to communicate with her through pictures and gestures, knew when she needed space and when she needed gentle encouragement. "I'll be back at 3 o'clock, Marcus told her at the gate, though he knew she might not fully process the words. "I love you." Maya didn't respond. She never did. But as she walked through the gate, she turned back once, just once, and looked at him. And for Marcus, that single glance was everything. 2 buses and 90 minutes later, Marcus arrived at the Monroe estate. He entered through the service entrance, changed into his work uniform, and began his daily routine. But today he felt different. Exposed. Victoria had seen him with Ethan in the garden, and that meant everything had changed. He could feel her eyes on him as he moved through the house. Watching, calculating, suspicious. He worked in silence, avoiding her gaze, but before heading to the supply closet, Marcus slipped a small folded note under Ethan's bedroom door. "Keep doing your leg stretches, buddy. You're stronger than you think. M." He'd been leaving notes like this for weeks, small encouragements, reminders, affirmations that someone believed in him. Marcus knew what it was like to feel invisible, forgotten. He wouldn't let Ethan feel that way. 3 days later, the private investigator's report arrived at Victoria's office in a thick manila envelope. Victoria dismissed her assistant, locked her office door, and opened it with trembling hands. What she read left her speechless. Marcus Chen, 35 years old. Master's degree in pediatric physical therapy from USC. Graduated top of his class. Worked at Children's Hospital Los Angeles for 6 years, specializing in neurological rehabilitation for children with spinal injuries and developmental delays. Victoria stopped breathing. He wasn't just some janitor who'd picked up a few techniques from his wife. He was a trained professional, one of the best in his field. She kept reading, her hands shaking. Wife, Lin Chun, deceased. Died 3 years ago from complications during childbirth. Second child, a son, stillborn. Daughter, Maya Chun, age 8, diagnosed with severe autism at age 2. Victoria's throat tightened. Following wife's death, subject took extended leave from Children's Hospital to care for daughter full-time. Applied to 87 positions over 18-month period. Pediatric clinics, rehabilitation centers, private practices. All applications rejected. Reasons cited in internal HR notes obtained through source. Too much personal baggage. Childcare responsibilities incompatible with demanding schedule. Candidate appears emotionally unstable. Victoria felt something crack open inside her chest. This man, this brilliant, compassionate, qualified professional, had been rejected not because he lacked skill, but because he loved his daughter too much. Because he'd chosen her over his career. Because the world saw single fathers as liabilities instead of heroes. But the report didn't end there. Current activities. Subject works night shifts as janitor at Monroe Properties estate. Additionally, volunteers 3 nights per week at St. Jerome's Community Clinic in East LA, running free physical therapy program for low-income immigrant families with disabled children. Victoria's vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. The investigator had included photographs. Marcus at the clinic, kneeling beside a little girl in leg braces, guiding her through exercises with infinite patience. Marcus demonstrating balance techniques to a boy with cerebral palsy using nothing but elastic bands and sand-filled water bottles. Marcus laughing with a group of children who looked at him like he was a hero. And at the bottom of one photograph, the investigator had included a transcribed quote from a mother he'd interviewed. "Mr. Chen is the only reason my daughter can hold a pencil now. He's a miracle worker. He doesn't charge us anything. Says he does it because every child deserves a chance. I don't know where he finds the energy after working all day, but he never misses a session. Never. That man is an angel." Victoria closed the file and sat in silence, her perfectly controlled world crumbling around her. That night, Victoria couldn't sleep. She paced her bedroom, the investigator's report playing through her mind on an endless loop. Finally, at 2 a.m., she went down to her home office and pulled up the security footage she'd been collecting over the past week. She watched Marcus arrive early every morning, an hour before his shift officially began, carrying his worn backpack. She watched him transform Ethan's therapy space with heartbreaking ingenuity. Pillows arranged as balance obstacles, resistance bands fashioned from old clothing, dumbbells improvised from household items. Every ordinary object in her multi-million-dollar mansion had been quietly repurposed into rehabilitation equipment, used with precision and care. Victoria fast-forwarded through hours of footage and then stopped, her breath catching. There, on the screen, was Marcus sitting on the floor of Ethan's room late one night, long after everyone had gone to bed. He was writing in a thick notebook by the light of his phone. Victoria zoomed in, her heart pounding. She could see the pages covered in careful handwriting. Detailed notes, charts, observations. The next morning, Victoria went to Ethan's room while Marcus was working downstairs. She found the notebook hidden beneath a loose floorboard near the therapy equipment. With shaking hands, she opened it. Day 12. Ethan held balance for 8 seconds unassisted. Confidence visibly improving. Recommended next step, standing weight transfers. Day 18. Major breakthrough, lifted left leg independently for first time. Neuroplasticity exercises showing measurable progress. Patient responding to positive reinforcement. Day 24. Smiled during exercises. First genuine smile in weeks. Emotional healing progressing alongside physical recovery. Note: mother still distant. Patient needs maternal encouragement. Victoria sank to the floor, clutching the notebook to her chest, tears streaming down her face. This man, this humble, overlooked janitor, had been pouring more love, more hope, more belief into her son than she had in 2 years. While she'd been building empires and closing deals, Marcus Chen had been rebuilding her son's shattered spirit one exercise, one smile, one moment of encouragement at a time. And he'd asked for nothing in return. Victoria sat there for a long time, surrounded by the homemade rehabilitation equipment, the careful notes, the evidence of a love so pure and selfless it shattered every defense she'd built around her heart. Finally, she stood, wiped her tears, and made a decision. She needed to confront Marcus again. But this time, not with anger or suspicion. This time, with the only question that mattered. Why are you helping my son when the world treated you so unfairly? Because Victoria needed to understand what drove this man. Needed to know if people like him. People who gave without expecting anything in return still existed in a world that had taught her that everything had a price. And maybe, just maybe, she needed to learn from him how to be the kind of mother her son deserved. The next evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the Beverly Hills sky in shades of deep purple and gold, Victoria waited in the garden. She'd asked Marcus to meet her here after his shift, not in her intimidating office with its floor-to-ceiling windows and power dynamics, but in this quiet space where she'd first witnessed him helping Ethan, where everything had changed. Marcus arrived exactly on time, still wearing his work uniform, his shoulders tense with apprehension. He'd known this conversation was coming from the moment he'd seen the way Victoria had been watching him all week, calculating, suspicious, searching for answers. "Mrs. Monroe," he said quietly, stopping a respectful distance away. "You wanted to see me?" Victoria turned to face him, the private investigator's thick manila envelope in her hands. She held it up, her gray eyes unreadable in the fading light. "I know who you are, Marcus," she said, her voice steady but edged with something he couldn't quite name. "Master's degree in pediatric physical therapy from USC. 6 years at Children's Hospital Los Angeles. 87 job applications rejected. 3 years of your life erased from your resume because you chose to care for your daughter." Marcus's calm facade cracked. His jaw tightened, his hands clenched at his sides. And for the first time since she'd met him, Victoria saw anger flash across his face. Not at her, but at the injustice of it all. "Why didn't you tell me?" Victoria pressed, stepping closer. "Why let me think you were just a janitor?" Marcus let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Would you have believed me, Mrs. Monroe? A janitor showing up at your door, claiming to be a trained therapist? Or would you have fired me on the spot and called security?" The words hung between them, sharp and undeniable. "You would have thought I was crazy," Marcus continued, his voice low but fierce. "Or worse, dangerous. A man with no job references, a 3-year gap in employment, desperate enough to take a cleaning position. You would have assumed I was lying to get access to your money, your home, your son." Victoria opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. Because he was right. She would have done exactly that. Marcus looked away, his shoulders sagging with exhaustion. "So I stayed quiet. I did my job. And I helped Ethan because I could not help him." "What do you mean?" Victoria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the spot where Ethan had been practicing just days earlier. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw with a pain Victoria recognized, the pain of guilt that never goes away. "I was on duty at Children's Hospital the night of Ethan's car accident," he said quietly. 2 years ago, November 14th. I remember the date because it was the same day Lynn died, 3 years to the day. Victoria's breath caught in her throat. "Your son came into the ER with severe trauma," Marcus continued, his voice breaking. "I wasn't assigned to his case, but I reviewed the files anyway. I always did. Couldn't stop myself from checking on every child who came through those doors. And when I saw Ethan's nerve damage assessment, I knew immediately that the prognosis was wrong." He turned to face Victoria, tears glistening in his eyes. "The lead surgeon said the damage was permanent. Said Ethan would need braces and crutches for life. But I just finished a specialized training program in neuroplasticity therapy, cutting-edge techniques that use the brain's ability to rewire itself to build new neural pathways around damaged nerves. The research showed that with intensive, targeted rehabilitation started immediately after injury, children with Ethan's exact condition could recover up to 60% of lost function." Victoria felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "I went to the lead surgeon," Marcus said, his voice thick with anger and regret. "I showed him the research papers, the case studies, the success rates. I begged him to consider neuroplasticity therapy for Ethan. Do you know what he said? Victoria shook her head, unable to speak. He said it was experimental, too risky, too expensive, that the insurance companies wouldn't cover it, and you were already facing massive medical bills from your husband's death. He dismissed me like I was nothing, told me to stay in my lane. Marcus's hands were shaking now, his entire body trembling with the weight of a confession he'd been carrying for 2 years. I quit Children's Hospital 3 weeks later, he whispered. Couldn't work in a place that valued money over children's lives. But I never stopped thinking about Ethan, about what could have been done for him if someone had just listened. Victoria's legs felt weak. She sank onto the garden bench, her mind reeling. When I saw your job posting 8 months ago, night janitor needed at the Monroe estate in Beverly Hills, I looked up the address and realized it was your house. I knew it was my chance to make things right, to do what I couldn't do 2 years ago. You took a janitor job, Victoria said slowly, her voice hoarse with emotion. Just to help my son? Not just for Ethan, Marcus said fiercely. For every child I couldn't save. For my son who didn't survive. For Maya, who I fight for every single day. For Lynn, who dedicated her life to helping children no one else wanted to help. He looked directly at Victoria, his eyes blazing with conviction. When I saw your job posting for janitor, I knew it was my chance to make things right. Not just for Ethan, for every child the system failed. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria sat motionless, trying to process everything Marcus had just revealed. Finally, she found her voice. Tell me about Lynn, she said softly. Tell me about your wife. Marcus's expression softened, grief and love mingling in his eyes. Lynn Chen was a nurse at Children's Hospital. He began, his voice tender. We met during my residency. She had this light about her. She believed every child deserved a fighting chance, no matter how poor their family was, no matter how complicated their condition. He sat down on the bench beside Victoria, his gaze distant with memory. We dreamed of opening our own pediatric rehabilitation clinic, a place that would never turn away a child because their parents couldn't pay. We saved every penny, worked double shifts, made plans. His voice cracked. When Lynn got pregnant with our second child, we thought our family was complete. Maya was 4. We were happy. And then Marcus paused, struggling to continue. Complications. Emergency C-section. Lynn didn't make it. Neither did our son. Victoria reached out instinctively and placed her hand over his. Marcus didn't pull away. Maya was traumatized, he said quietly. She stopped speaking almost entirely, regressed into severe autism. The doctors said she'd never communicate normally, never function independently. They wanted to institutionalize her. But you didn't, Victoria said. I couldn't, Marcus replied. I'd already lost Lynn and our son. I wasn't going to lose Maya too. So I left my career, learned everything I could about autism therapy, became her full-time caregiver. He looked at Victoria, his eyes fierce with determination. I promised Lynn before she died that I'd never stop helping children. So I work at night to pay rent, volunteer at St. Jerome's Clinic 3 nights a week, and raise Maya the way Lynn would have wanted, with love, patience, and the belief that every person deserves dignity. Victoria felt tears streaming down her face, tears she didn't bother to hide. Marcus, she whispered, I'm so sorry. For everything you've lost. For everything you've endured. Don't be sorry, Marcus said gently. I'm not. Because Maya's thriving now. Because I help dozens of children every week who have no one else. Because I got to help Ethan believe in himself again. He turned to face her fully. Mrs. Monroe, your son doesn't need expensive treatments or elite specialists. He needs someone who believes in him, who sees him as a whole person, not just a medical condition. That's what neuroplasticity therapy really is, teaching the brain to heal itself through belief, repetition, and love. Victoria stood abruptly, pacing the garden as emotions crashed through her like waves. Finally, she stopped and turned to Marcus, her carefully constructed defenses crumbling entirely. I failed him, she said, her voice breaking. After Daniel died in the accident, I couldn't look at Ethan without seeing my husband's face. without feeling the crushing guilt that I wasn't there, that I couldn't protect them. She wrapped her arms around herself, trembling. So I buried myself in work. Endless meetings, property deals, empire building, anything to avoid the pain of watching my son suffer. I abandoned him when he needed me most. Mrs. Monroe. Victoria, she interrupted. Please, call me Victoria. Marcus nodded. You didn't abandon him, Victoria, he said softly. You were drowning in grief. People survive trauma in different ways. But you didn't run, Victoria said, her voice raw with admiration and shame. You lost everything, your wife, your son, your career, and you still chose to love, to help, to give. While I, with all my wealth and resources, ran away. She looked at Marcus through tear-filled eyes. You've been the father Ethan lost, she whispered, and I've been too proud and too broken to see it. Victoria wiped her tears and straightened her shoulders, her business instincts kicking back in. When she spoke again, her voice was steady, commanding. I want to hire you, she said, officially, as Ethan's full-time pediatric physical therapist. I'll pay you triple what you earned at Children's Hospital. Full medical benefits, housing in the guest house, and we'll cover Maya's therapy and education at the best special needs school in California. Marcus stood, shaking his head. Mrs. Monroe, Victoria, I appreciate the offer, but what? Victoria asked, confused. I don't want charity, Marcus said firmly. I don't want you to hire me out of guilt or pity. I want Ethan to walk again because he deserves it, not because you're paying me to ease your conscience. The word stung, but Victoria understood. This man's integrity was unshakable. Then do it for both of us, Victoria said, her voice breaking. Teach me how to be a mother again. Teach me how to see my son the way you do, with hope instead of fear. Teach me how to love him the way he deserves. Marcus stared at her for a long moment, searching her face for sincerity. Finally, he nodded slowly. I'll do it, he said, but on one condition. Anything. You participate in every session. You learn the techniques. You become part of his healing. Because Ethan doesn't just need a therapist, he needs his mother. Victoria nodded, tears streaming freely now. I'm ready. Marcus's expression turned serious, almost grim. The therapy will be intense, he warned. Neuroplasticity rehabilitation requires pushing the body and brain to their limits. Ethan will be in pain, real pain. There will be setbacks, frustration, tears. Are you ready to watch your son suffer before he heals? Victoria thought of Ethan's face lighting up during exercises with Marcus. Thought of the notebook filled with careful observations. Thought of 2 years of running from pain instead of facing it. She met Marcus's eyes, her voice steady and determined. I'm ready. 3 days later, Marcus and Maya moved into the guest house on Victoria's property, a small, elegant cottage nestled behind the main mansion with its own garden entrance and privacy. Marcus carried their meager belongings in 2 worn duffel bags while Maya clutched her sketchbook to her chest, eyes wide and uncertain as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. Victoria stood on the main house porch, watching them settle in, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. This was real now. No turning back. That afternoon, she orchestrated the first official meeting between Ethan and Maya in the living room. Ethan wheeled himself in, nervous but smiling, his green eyes bright with curiosity. Maya sat in the corner, knees drawn to her chest, her gaze fixed on the carpet as she rocked gently back and forth. Hi, Ethan said softly, approaching slowly so as not to startle her. I'm Ethan. Marcus told me about you. He says you're really good at drawing. Maya didn't respond, didn't look up, just kept rocking. Ethan didn't seem discouraged. He wheeled closer and pulled out a piece of paper and some colored pencils from his lap. I like drawing too. Want to see what I made? He placed his drawing on the floor between them, a simple sketch of a garden with a rainbow overhead. Maya's rocking slowed. Her eyes flickered toward the paper, then away, then back again. From the doorway, Victoria watched, her chest tight with emotion. Marcus stood beside her, his expression tender. He's good with her, Marcus whispered. Not everyone knows how to be patient like that. He learned it from you. Victoria said quietly. Over the next 3 weeks, Victoria's backyard transformed into a professional rehabilitation space. Marcus worked tirelessly, installing parallel bars along the garden path, hanging resistance bands from the pergola, setting up balance beams, and foam mats across the lawn. Every piece of equipment was carefully positioned, every detail thoughtfully planned. Victoria funded everything without question. Whatever Marcus needed, she provided immediately. But more importantly, she participated in every single therapy session, just as she'd promised. She learned how to support Ethan's legs at the correct pressure points, how to read the subtle signs of fatigue versus pain, how to encourage without pushing too hard. Marcus taught her the language of neuroplasticity therapy, how repetition builds neural pathways, how the brain learns to rewire itself around damaged nerves, how pain during rehabilitation is different from injury pain. The brain is remarkably adaptive. Marcus explained one afternoon as they guided Ethan through standing exercises. When we challenge it consistently, push it just beyond its comfort zone, it responds by creating new connections, new pathways. That's what we're doing here. We're teaching Ethan's brain to remember how to walk. And it was working. By the end of week 1, Ethan could stand unassisted for 15 seconds. By week 2, 30 seconds. He took small, trembling steps between the parallel bars with Marcus and Victoria on either side, their hands ready to catch him if he fell. "Mom, look!" Ethan shouted one morning, his face flushed with triumph. I stood for a whole minute. Victoria felt tears stream down her face, tears of joy this time, not grief. "You're incredible, sweetheart. So strong." For the first time in 2 years, Victoria felt something she thought she'd lost forever: hope. And it wasn't just Ethan who was transforming. Maya, who had been silent and withdrawn when she first arrived, began to open up around him. She started sitting closer during Ethan's therapy sessions, watching intently as Marcus guided him through exercises. Ethan, exhausted after each session, would sit on the grass beside her and draw, narrating his pictures in a gentle voice. "This is a dragon," Ethan would say, sketching with his colored pencils. "He's really strong. He helps people who are scared." Maya would inch closer, her eyes fixed on his drawing. Then, one afternoon, something miraculous happened. She pointed at one of Ethan's sketches and made a soft sound, almost like a word. Marcus's head snapped up from across the garden. "Maya, did you?" She pointed again, this time tapping the paper insistently. Ethan grinned. "You like the dragon? I'll draw you one too." Victoria watched from the porch, her hand pressed to her mouth. Marcus stood frozen, tears glistening in his eyes as his daughter engaged with another person. Really, truly engaged for the first time in months. "She's talking through him," Victoria whispered to Marcus later that evening. "Ethan is reaching her in ways no one else can." "They're healing each other," Marcus replied softly. But progress, Victoria was about to learn, always comes with a price. It was a Thursday afternoon in the 3rd week. The sun blazed overhead, the garden shimmering with heat. Marcus had set up an ambitious training exercise. Ethan would attempt to walk across the entire lawn, 15 feet, completely unassisted. Victoria stood at the edge of the patio, her heart pounding as she watched Marcus kneel beside Ethan at the starting point. "Remember everything we've practiced," Marcus said, his voice calm but intense. "Core engaged. Weight balanced. One step at a time. You can do this, Ethan. I know you can." Ethan nodded, his face set with determination. He gripped Marcus's shoulders and pushed himself upright, his legs trembling violently beneath him. Marcus slowly released his hold, stepping back. "You've got this, buddy." Ethan took a deep breath. Then he lifted his right foot and took one step, then another. His face flushed red with effort, sweat beading on his forehead, but he didn't stop. 3 steps. 4. 5. Victoria's heart soared. "Ethan, you're doing it." But then, on the 6th step, Ethan's left leg buckled. His knee gave out completely, and he crumpled forward with a scream that shattered the afternoon air like broken glass. My leg. It hurts." Victoria was watching from her bedroom window, having stepped inside just moments earlier to grab water. She saw Ethan collapse, saw him writhing on the grass, heard his agonized cries, and every buried fear, every nightmare she'd been running from for 2 years erupted inside her like a volcano. This is exactly what I was afraid of. She bolted down the stairs and burst through the garden doors, her face twisted with panic and rage. "What did you do to him?" she screamed, running toward where Marcus was already kneeling beside Ethan, assessing his legs with professional efficiency. "You hurt my son." "Victoria, wait." Marcus started, his voice calm but urgent. "I trusted you." Victoria's voice cracked as tears streamed down her face. "I let you into our lives. I believed in you. And you push him too hard. Look at him." Ethan was sobbing, clutching his left leg, his face contorted in pain. "Mom, it hurts so much." Marcus kept his voice steady, his hands gently probing Ethan's leg. "Mrs. Monroe, Victoria, this is part of the process. His muscles are rebuilding. The nerve pathways are reconnecting. Pain means progress. Pain means you failed." Victoria screamed, her voice raw with terror disguised as fury. "Get away from him. Get out. Pack your things. I don't want to see you near my son ever again." Marcus froze, his eyes wide with shock and heartbreak. "Victoria, please, if you'll just let me explain." "I said get out." The words hung in the air, brutal and final. Marcus stood slowly, his hands trembling. He looked down at Ethan, who was staring up at him through tears, and knelt one last time. "Ethan," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You were so close, buddy. You were incredible. Don't stop believing in yourself. Promise me." "Marcus, no." Ethan sobbed, reaching for him. "Don't go. Please." "Mom, no." Ethan cried out, his voice desperate. "Please don't make him leave. I'm okay. It's just sore muscles, I swear." But Victoria was beyond reason, beyond logic. She was drowning in terror. Terror that she'd made the wrong choice, that she'd endangered her son, that Marcus's success would prove she'd failed as a mother. "Go," she said coldly, her voice shaking. "Now." Marcus straightened, his face a mask of grief. He glanced at Maya, who had been watching from the porch, and gestured for her to follow. Without another word, he walked toward the guest house to collect their belongings. Victoria called 911 and held Ethan while they waited for the ambulance, her hands shaking, her mind screaming that she'd just saved her son, even as Ethan wept in her arms, begging her to bring Marcus back. The aftermath was devastating. At the hospital, the doctors examined Ethan and delivered their verdict: severe muscle strain from overexertion. No permanent damage. Rest for 2 weeks, ice packs, anti-inflammatories. The lead physician, a different doctor than the one who treated Ethan after the accident, looked at Victoria with barely concealed judgment. "Mrs. Monroe, what kind of therapy was your son receiving?" "Neuroplasticity rehabilitation," Victoria said quietly, shame burning in her chest. "From whom?" "A private therapist." The doctor frowned. "Licensed?" Victoria hesitated. "Yes. USC trained. Former children's hospital specialist." "I see." The doctor made a note on his chart. "Well, whoever this therapist is, they push your son far too hard. This level of strain is unacceptable." Victoria said nothing. The words she wanted to scream, "He was helping him. He was saving him," died in her throat. The days that followed were the darkest Victoria had experienced since Daniel's death. Ethan refused to speak. For 3 full days, he sat in his wheelchair, staring out the window, silent and unreachable. Victoria tried everything, his favorite meals, movies, gentle encouragement, but nothing reached him. The light that Marcus had rekindled in his eyes had vanished. On the 4th day, Victoria called in the hospital specialist Marcus had replaced, elite physical therapist from Cedars-Sinai with pristine credentials and corporate smiles. They arrived with state-of-the-art equipment and clinical efficiency. "Come on, Ethan," one of them said brightly, setting up parallel bars in the living room. "Let's try some standing exercises." Ethan shook his head silently, his arms crossed over his chest. "Ethan, please," Victoria begged, kneeling beside him. "You need to keep practicing. You are doing so well." He turned to her, and the look in his eyes shattered her heart. "I want Marcus," he whispered. "I don't want them." I want Marcus. Victoria tried to respond, but her throat closed up. She had no answer. Across town, in his cramped Koreatown apartment, Marcus Chen was falling apart. Maya had regressed completely. She'd stopped making eye contact, stopped pointing at pictures, stopped responding to anything. She sat in the corner rocking back and forth for hours, tears streaming down her face, whispering one word over and over. Ethan. 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 She was saying Ethan's name, or trying to. Marcus worked double shifts at a commercial cleaning company, barely sleeping, barely eating, trying to distract himself from the crushing weight of failure. He'd been so close. Ethan had been on the verge of a breakthrough. 6 weeks of progress, 6 weeks of rebuilding hope, all destroyed in a single moment. Late at night, Marcus sat on the floor beside Maya, holding her while she rocked, and whispered apologies to his wife's memory. I tried, Lynn. I tried so hard, but I wasn't enough. On the 7th day after the firing, Victoria's phone rang. Mrs. Monroe, this is Dr. Patel, your son's lead physician at Cedars-Sinai. I need to schedule an emergency meeting with you. Today, if possible. Victoria's stomach dropped. What's wrong? Is Ethan okay? Ethan is fine, Dr. Patel said carefully. But I've been reviewing his medical record from the past 6 weeks, and... Mrs. Monroe, I need to show you something about his progress charts. This is urgent. Victoria agreed to meet him that afternoon, dread and confusion swirling in her chest. What could possibly be so urgent? Victoria sat in Dr. Patel's office at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, her hands gripping the armrests of the leather chair as he spread a series of charts and scans across his desk. Her heart hammered against her ribs, dread coiling in her stomach like a living thing. Mrs. Monroe, Dr. Patel began, his voice careful and measured as he adjusted his glasses. I've been reviewing Ethan's medical records from the past 6 weeks, the period during which he was receiving alternative therapy. Victoria's throat tightened. I know. I made a mistake. The therapist pushed him too hard, and... Mrs. Monroe, Dr. Patel interrupted gently, holding up his hand. Please, let me show you something. He pulled up a digital scan on his computer screen, 2 images side by side, both showing detailed nerve pathway imaging of Ethan's legs. This image on the left, Dr. Patel said, pointing, was taken 2 years ago, immediately after the accident. You can see the severe damage to the tibial and peroneal nerves in both legs, the areas highlighted in red. The prognosis at that time was permanent loss of function. No recovery expected. Victoria nodded numbly, her eyes fixed on the scarring visible even to her untrained eye. And this image, Dr. Patel continued, pulling up the second scan, was taken 3 days ago when you brought Ethan to the emergency room. Victoria leaned forward, her breath catching. The red areas had shrunk. New pathways, thin threads of green and yellow, had appeared where there had been nothing before, branching around the damaged sections like rivers finding new routes to the sea. What am I looking at? Victoria whispered. Dr. Patel's expression was one of genuine awe. Neuroplasticity, Mrs. Monroe. Your son has regained 55% nerve conductivity in his left leg and 48% in his right. Improvements that are, frankly, statistically impossible for his original diagnosis. The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. She gripped the edge of the desk to steady herself. Impossible, she managed. By traditional standards, yes, Dr. Patel said, his voice gaining intensity. But this is cutting-edge neuroplasticity therapy. The brain has literally rewired itself, creating new neural pathways to bypass the damaged nerves. It's the kind of recovery we see in controlled research studies, not in real-world cases. He turned to face Victoria fully, his expression serious. Mrs. Monroe, whoever worked with your son didn't hurt him. The muscle strain he experienced was a natural consequence of intensive rehabilitation. His muscles were rebuilding, adapting to support functions they hadn't performed in 2 years. That therapist didn't push Ethan too hard. They saved his future. Victoria felt the room spin. She collapsed back in her chair, her hands covering her face as the full weight of what she'd done crashed over her like a tidal wave. Oh God, she whispered. Oh God, what have I done? That night, At exactly midnight, Victoria's black Mercedes pulled up outside a rundown apartment complex in Koreatown. She'd gotten the address from Marcus's employment file, the one piece of information she'd kept from the private investigator's report. The building looked worse in person than it had in the surveillance photos. Peeling paint, broken security lights, trash bins overflowing in the alley. This was where Marcus Chen lived. This was where a man with a master's degree from USC and 6 years of experience at one of the nation's top hospitals called home. Victoria climbed the narrow stairs to the 3rd floor, her designer heels clicking against cracked linoleum, and stopped outside apartment 3C. Through the thin door, she could hear voices, Marcus's gentle murmur and Maya's soft sounds. She knocked. The voices stopped. Footsteps approached. The door opened, and Marcus stood there, frozen in shock. He was wearing old sweatpants and a faded t-shirt, his hair disheveled, dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and endless worry. "Mrs. Monroe?" His voice was hoarse, disbelieving. Victoria looked past him into the tiny studio apartment. It was barely larger than her walk-in closet. One corner held a mattress where Maya sat wrapped in a blanket, rocking gently, her eyes red from crying. In the center of the room was a folding table with Marcus's laptop open, lines of code visible on the screen, freelance programming work he was doing to make rent. On the floor beside the computer were scattered physical therapy textbooks, medical journals, and a framed photograph of a beautiful woman holding a baby, Lynn and Maya. Victoria realized from before the world had taken everything from them. "May I come in?" Victoria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus hesitated, then stepped aside. Victoria entered and immediately sank to her knees on the worn carpet, tears streaming down her face. She didn't care about her expensive suit or her carefully maintained composure. None of that mattered anymore. "I'm sorry," she choked out, her voice breaking. "Marcus, I'm so sorry." Marcus stood frozen, clearly not knowing what to do or say. "I went to see Dr. Patel today," Victoria continued, forcing herself to look up at him through her tears. "He showed me Ethan's scans, the nerve regeneration, the neuroplasticity, everything you did for him, everything you saved." She pressed her hands to her face, sobbing openly now. "I blamed you because I was terrified," she whispered. "Terrified that if you succeeded where I failed, it would prove what I've known all along, that I abandoned my son when he needed me most. That I'm a terrible mother who let work and grief destroy the most important relationship in my life." Marcus knelt down beside her slowly. "Victoria, you gave Ethan something I thought died with his father," Victoria said, looking at him with raw honesty. "Hope. You gave him belief in himself, in his future, in the possibility of healing. And you did it while the world treated you like you were invisible, while I treated you like you were nothing." She reached out and gripped his hands. "Please come back," she begged. "Not for me. I don't deserve your forgiveness. But for Ethan. He's been asking for you every single day. He won't eat, won't speak, won't do therapy. He just sits by the window waiting for you." Marcus's eyes glistened with tears. "Mrs. Monroe, let me make you visible again," Victoria said fiercely. "Let me give you the recognition, the resources, the respect you deserve. Not as charity, as justice." Marcus was silent for a long time, his gaze drifting to Maya in the corner. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "I'll come back," he said, "but with one condition. Anything. This time, we work as a team." Marcus said, his eyes meeting hers with unwavering conviction. "No secrets, no fear, no running when things get hard. We do this together, for Ethan, for Maya, for all of us. Together." Victoria nodded, tears still streaming. Together. For weeks later, the miracle everyone had been waiting for finally happened. It was a Sunday afternoon, the garden bathed in golden sunlight. Marcus had been back for a month, and the transformation in both children had been remarkable. Ethan had thrown himself into therapy with renewed determination, and Maya, surrounded by Ethan's patient kindness, had started pointing at pictures again, making eye contact, whispering single words. Victoria was in her home office reviewing architectural plans for a project Marcus had proposed, something she'd been thinking about constantly for weeks, when she heard Ethan's voice ring out across the estate. "Mom, Mom, come outside. Now." The urgency in his voice sent Victoria's heart racing. She dropped everything and sprinted through the house, bursting through the garden doors, her mind flooded with fear and hope in equal measure. And then she saw him. Ethan was standing in the center of the lawn. No crutches, no braces, no wheelchair, no support of any kind. Just standing there on his own two legs, trembling slightly but upright, his face radiant with triumph and joy. Marcus stood 10 feet away, his arms open, tears streaming down his face. "You ready, buddy?" Ethan nodded, his green eyes blazing with determination. And then he took a step, one shaking, trembling step forward, then another, then another. Victoria's hands flew to her mouth, sobs tearing from her throat as she watched her son, her beautiful, brave, miraculous son, walk. 3 steps. 4, 5, 6, 7. On the 8th step, Ethan's legs wobbled violently, and he started to fall. But Marcus was there, catching him, pulling him into a fierce embrace as they both collapsed onto the grass, laughing and crying. "You did it!" Marcus shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "Ethan, you walked. You actually walked." Victoria ran to them, dropping to her knees in the grass, wrapping her arms around both of them as tears poured down her face. She held her son, really held him, for the first time in what felt like forever, and felt his small body shaking with laughter and pride. "I love you, sweetheart," she sobbed into his hair. "I'm so proud of you. So proud." "I love you too, Mom," Ethan whispered back. "Did you see? I walked. Marcus said I could, and I did." Victoria looked up at Marcus, their eyes meeting over Ethan's head. The man she'd almost destroyed wasn't just a janitor. He was the father her son had lost, the healer her money couldn't buy, and the miracle she'd been too blind to see. "Thank you," she whispered to Marcus, the words utterly inadequate but all she had. "Thank you for never giving up on him." Marcus smiled through his tears. He never gave up on himself. I just reminded him what he was capable of. As the 3 of them sat there in the grass, holding each other as the sunset painted the sky gold, Victoria felt something shift inside her chest, something broken finally beginning to heal. 6 months later, the garden was filled with laughter and the smell of grilled food. Ethan, now walking with only the slightest limp, ran across the lawn chasing a soccer ball, his movements still cautious but growing stronger every day. Beside him, Maya ran too, her dark braids flying behind her, her voice ringing out in full, clear sentences. "Ethan, pass. Pass to me." Ethan laughed and kicked the ball gently in her direction. Maya trapped it with her foot, a skill Marcus had been teaching her, and grinned with pride. "I did it," she shouted, her eyes shining. At the outdoor grill, Victoria and Marcus worked side by side, turning hamburgers and laughing about how badly Victoria had burned the first batch. "I'm a real estate billionaire," Victoria said with mock indignation. "I can negotiate $1 million deals, but I can't flip a burger without setting it on fire." Marcus chuckled. "It's all about timing, and not getting distracted watching the kids." Victoria smiled, her heart full in a way she'd never thought possible. "They're amazing together, aren't they?" "They saved each other," Marcus said quietly. As the sun began to set, Ethan jogged, Victoria noted with a surge of joy, and tugged on Marcus's sleeve. "Marcus," Ethan asked, his voice suddenly shy. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything, buddy." Ethan glanced at Victoria, then back at Marcus. Are you going to be my new dad?" The question hung in the air, tender and vulnerable. Marcus's eyes filled with tears. He looked at Victoria, a silent question in his gaze. She nodded, smiling through her own tears. Marcus knelt down, so he was eye level with Ethan. "I'm going to be whoever you need me to be, buddy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Always." Victoria stepped closer, placing her hand on Ethan's shoulder and looking at Maya, who had come over to stand beside Marcus. "We're a team now," Victoria said softly, her voice steady and sure. All four of us. 3 months after that, the grand opening of the Chen Monroe Center for Pediatric Rehabilitation took place in East Los Angeles. The state-of-the-art facility stood where St. Jerome's Community Clinic had once been, a gleaming testament to second chances and the power of believing in people the world had overlooked. Inside were cutting-edge rehabilitation equipment, trained therapists, and a mission statement carved into the lobby wall. Every child deserves a fighting chance. Chen believed it. We honor her legacy. Marcus stood at the entrance as medical director, greeting families who'd been on waiting lists for months, offering hope where there had been none. Victoria stood beside him, not as the billionaire CEO, but as a partner, a supporter, a friend. "This is what you and Lynn dreamed of," Victoria said quietly as they watched children streaming through the doors. Children with autism, cerebral palsy, nerve damage, developmental delays, all of them receiving free, world-class care. "It's more than I ever imagined," Marcus replied, his voice thick with emotion. Victoria learned in those months that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars or properties or Forbes rankings. It was measured in lives transformed, in children who learned to walk, in families who learned to hope, in second chances given and received. And as she watched Ethan and Maya playing together in the center's garden, 2 children who'd both lost so much but found healing in each other, Victoria finally understood what it meant to be truly rich. If this story reminded you that everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about, I want you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on the notification bell. And share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's struggling, someone who feels invisible, someone who's lost hope. Because here's the truth. The next person you overlook, the janitor, the cashier, the quiet stranger, might just be the miracle you've been praying for. Drop a comment below telling us about a time someone unexpected changed your life. We read every single one, and your story might inspire someone else who needs it today. Remember, miracles aren't bought. They're built by ordinary people doing extraordinary things with love. See you in the next video.